equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child loss. This is the Hope After Child Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you will hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. Welcome to another episode of the Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Greg Buffkin, and I'm so glad you could join us. Today, I'm going to be talking with a very special young couple, Kendall and Andy Reid of Warner Robins, Georgia. They'll be sharing the story of not just one loss, but two, having lost their daughter, Ruby, in October, actually October the 9th, which is the day that we're recording today, of 2017, and just a couple of years later, losing their son, Jack, to stillbirth. So let's welcome my guests, Kendall and Andy Reid, to the podcast. Kendall and Andy Reid, it is so good to have you guys with us today. And I think even though we weren't aware of it, we've got a special guest, surprise guest joining us today, and her name is Abigail, and she's 1 year old. So welcome to Abigail as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Kendall is a school teacher, and this is fall break. So she is doing her other job today, being a stay-at-home mom for the week.
Yes,
so guys, I'm so glad you could be with us today. Why don't you, and you guys can do this however you would like. If you want to split it or one of you take this and just bring us up to speed a little bit about, who you guys are and anything you want to share about, family-wise, just for a minute or two before we dive into your story.
Okay, so I'm Andy. I've been in Georgia since 2011. I'm originally from Michigan. That Kendall and I met within the first year of me getting to Georgia, and that's really kind of how everything starts from there. But I've been here for a while now. This is home. This is where I want to be. Even though I am from Michigan, I'd rather be down here in the South. So we'll be down here for the long haul. And
yeah, because you're in the military, so you guys do get moved around sometimes. But you're in the Air National Guard, so I guess you guys maybe don't move around quite as much.
Correct. There'll be no movement for me until I retire, and then once I retire, that'll be a conversation to be had. But up until that point, we are firm where we are. So
yeah, a Michigan boy. Yeah, I didn't
absolutely.
think I didn't think I detected a Georgia accent there.
No accent, unless it's a northern accent.
A Michigan accent. We'll go with that. Midwestern. Yeah.
Goodness.
Well, guys, why don't we just go ahead and move into your story? And we can do this in a couple of ways. You guys can both share if you would like, or one of you can share some part of it and the other another part of your story. But let's talk about why you're here today, and that's because you guys have suffered the pain and the loss of not just one, but two children. It's unspeakable enough to lose one child, but two is just, I don't know how you guys held up under that.
So yeah, there's not a lot of metrics when it comes to losing two children. You do have some for one, but you don't have much for two. I would say the big thing is you have to find your way to be resilient, and there's a healthy way, there's an unhealthy way to move forward. But just like anything, you got to continue to move forward. People that depend on you, people that count on you, and as much as everything can hurt, at the same time, that doesn't mean life stops. So you really have to find your resilience, figure out what it's going to take for you to cope and deal, but also continue to move forward. As much as it feels like time stops, it doesn't. And it's very important to continue to take care of your loved ones. Allow them to take care of you a little bit too. But it's awful. But you just got to keep going. You got to keep pressing forward.
Yeah, that is so true. And it reminds me of a question that I was going to ask you later on, but it seems appropriate now. And that's, men and women grieve differently. And moms and dads grieve differently.
Mm-hmm.
How did you guys navigate through that part of your grief journey where you had to take the time and make the effort to grieve as an individual, but at the same time to grieve together as husband and wife? And that sometimes can be challenging. So what did that
So,
look like for you all?
so for me, it was kind of twofold. Um, I had the first time I didn't do any of that. I put my sole focus on Kendall and making sure that she was well and she was taken care of. And kind of just, as the man of the house, I just buried everything deep down and figured that would be okay. Surprisingly enough, that doesn't work. And eventually that catches up to you. And then also, unfortunately, we had a redo. So when our son passed away, I had another opportunity to grieve, and I made sure to do things in a better, more healthy way. I don't regret taking time to ensure that Kendall was taken care of, but at the same time, I fully and completely neglected myself. Like I said, the first time around, I really just buried it, and just kind of went numb to it. I think it was kind of easy to do too, just because of the shocking nature of everything. Everything that the whole situation was a shock because Ruby wasn't moving around a lot. And so when we went to the hospital, they said, okay, well, we're going to do an emergency C-section and she's coming out now. So we're like, wow, this is really real now. Like, not, now the baby's coming, but we didn't anticipate, what the next couple of days was going to look like. So it's kind of a whirlwind, and it never really stopped being a whirlwind. So I think that kind of allows the individual to be able to compartmentalize and kind of take and put that stuff in a box and set it aside. But like I said, not recommended, not the healthy thing to do. Of course, you want to be there for your spouse, but you can't neglect yourself in the same time. So the second time around, for me, I really tried to ensure that Kendall was taken care of, but also take some time for myself. Sometimes there's just some quiet time, some time to reflect, do something that maybe took my mind off of things, things of that nature. Really try to consider my mental health in the process too, because that's just, quite frankly, I was not concerned about myself or my own mental health the first time around. And that, like I said, that didn't pan out great for me long term. Short term, it was fine. Long term, it definitely caused some problems for me. And it was just because of how I chose to deal with it.
Those are good words, Andy. And for another man who's lost a child, a dad who's listening today, you said that it eventually caught up with you. Do you mind just sharing what that looked like?
The short of it is that stress caused a lot of problems. In myself, the stress caused a lot of problems to where I wasn't perceiving things correctly. Is the best way to articulate it. And so, actually, it's a little bit different for us, but I essentially made a doctor's appointment, and I told them about some of the things that were going on with me, and then I considered something might be wrong physically with me. So one thing about me as well is that in 2013, my dad passed away from brain cancer.
Mm,
So I'm thinking if something feels off with me, there may be something wrong with my brain. So that's kind of so that's the first step. Is I never consider maybe something's wrong with my mental health. If I'm having some kind of issue, perhaps something's wrong with me physically. And like I said, that wasn't the case. So we did a scan. I'm healthy as far as that goes. I'm also healthy mentally now. But like I said, at the time, that's kind of how we figured out what was going on. She said, hey, let's do a CAT scan. Let's make sure everything's good. We did
right.
that. And then we kind of proceeded forward with, trying to treat it as far as a mental health issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you shared that, because I think too often people think of that level of grief, or really any level of grief, as just being emotional. And we know that is not the case. So I especially appreciate you sharing that as a dad, Andy. And something you said a minute ago is so descriptive. Men have the ability to, as you said, compartmentalize and put things in boxes. And women, of course, don't do that. At least not the vast majority of women do that. Everything is all wrapped up into one. And so when this happened with Ruby, you were able to compartmentalize your own pain and suffering to help her. But I'm glad that you shared that even though you were able to do that, that at some point you still have to deal with it, because if you don't, it will come out and you'll have to deal with it then. So
Right.
I'm thankful that you learned that in the first go round and were able to grieve in a healthier way when it happened again.
Absolutely.
Kendall, is there anything that you would like to add to that from a mom's perspective?
I've been a sharer from the get-go because I didn't want to forget anything that was going on. And with Ruby and Jack, it all happened so fast that I was afraid I would forget the details. So I knew that Facebook had the memories option that pop up every year. So I've always just shared how I was feeling and shared what was going on for just so that I wouldn't forget. And everyone's always said, I'm so glad you're sharing. Thank you for sharing with us. And I'm always like, I mean, you're welcome. It's not for you. It's for me.
Right. So how did you guys do that other aspect of it, grieving as a couple? Did you guys take time off to do that together, or did you have some particular way that you were able to talk about it with each other so that, one knows kind of what the other's going through and vice versa?
I'd say, well, for Ruby, I didn't really get a lot of time off, especially with her being the first loss. That's like you have no idea what's coming. You have no idea what it's going to be like. And so with that one, it was a little bit different. But like I said, it's not so much that we did grieve together, but grieving together was also grieving at the same time. For me in particular, it was so hyper focused on making sure that she was okay, because that's what you do. You know what I mean? That's that's part of my job description, is making sure that she's okay. So again, that wasn't necessarily a large grieving together. I would say the second time around, we did hang out. We spent a lot of time together. We did things that relaxed us and stuff. Of course, we've talked about it. We never really talked about it at great lengths, because that's just not how the process went. But second time around, we definitely spent more time. It was a little bit more balanced as far as the approach, and it'd be one of those things where you can grieve together, but sometimes, like you said, you have to grieve as an individual too. So that would be, I'd say, okay, well, I'm gonna go do this and just kind of decompress, and then so on and so forth. But it's a unique process, because though I was going through grief, we're still tasked to do things. And there was a time I had to leave home really a couple months after Ruby passed. And there's, as unfortunate as that is, that's the nature of it,
Right.
It's, the reality is I work at one of those jobs where when we got to go, we got to go. And so that doesn't really allow, especially, like I said, especially with Ruby, especially the first time, we didn't really have a lot of that grief together. We had that initial grief, and then I got to go to a different country, and that was in and of itself a whole another conversation, But
And how long was that deployment, Andy?
so that one was about 100 days, which again, 100 days really isn't bad, especially once you've done it for a while. I said the issue was I was doing it directly after, or within the first couple months of losing Ruby. So that definitely added a dynamic, because you never necessarily want to go. But that's a totally different dynamic when you've just had your whole world changed, and then, okay, by the way, now you got to go. So that was interesting.
That's tough on both of you.
That deployment stunk.
Yeah, deployments are always tough for everybody, but when you add that complication of just having lost a child and grieving, man, that's takes it to a whole different level, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Kendall, let me ask you this: as a mom, Andy and I were just talking about how he eventually realized that his grief was having a pretty significant mental impact. And of course, we all know that grief does have not only that and the emotional aspect, but there's also the spiritual component, and there is a physical component. How would you say, rather, it affected you the most? Was there any one particular one of those, or was there a combination of some of them?
I turned to the Lord immediately. I don't think I could have gotten through Ruby and then Jack without God.
I'm with you.
He gave me peace that passes all understanding about everything that was going on at the time. I just didn't want my kids to be forgotten. And that's what stressed me out the most, is that people would forget that Ruby and Jack were even a part of this world.
Yeah. I think that's every parent's fear. I heard what you just said, Kendall, and I appreciate what you said, because we too have talked about that so often, that when you go through something so life altering, I can't imagine having to experience that and trying to navigate it alone without a relationship with the Lord. And I think it is so important, because that's not something you can do after the fact. It's one of those things that in life, you're going to be facing suffering of some sort. And so having a relationship with the Lord is so critical in times like that. Sometimes people talk about how after the death of a child, it calls into question so many things that we held dear, so many things that we believed either about God or about our relationship with Him. And sometimes when things like this happen, it can leave us questioning just about any and everything, because again, our world's been turned upside down. How did that affect you guys? I mean, what did that look like in your lives?
So for me personally, it's a little bit different because of how I view things, right? So the idea of faith was never rocked with me, because to boil it down to the most simple terms, the existence of God is independent of if we have a child pass or not.
Amen.
It really has no bearing on it. So at times, obviously, I question what God's plan is, why things are happening. But as
Sure.
far as like rocking my faith, that never really happened. If you had no life experience and you only read the Bible, you would know that sometimes good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people, and so on and so forth. So there's, like I said, it's just that was never the issue. The big issue for me was why. And of course, we'll never, you lean not on your own understanding. So that's easier to say now, that we're years past and we have a living child at home. But at the time, that's really the kind of the focus is like, what is going on? What is the plan? I understand there's a plan. I don't understand why this is happening. But yeah, I never, like I said, my faith was never rocked. It was just in the really just the trying to understand where where are we going with this? Why is this happening? So especially with our son when he passed away, because with Ruby, what the doctors told us, they said this is a once in a million thing. The odds of this happening again are so astronomically low. And so I kind of just left it alone. I said, okay, well, it's one of those things that had to happen, and so be it. And then, a couple of years later, our son passed away. So then it's like, okay, well, this is not a 1 in a million. Now this is, 2 in 2 million, or whatever the case may be, however you want to frame it. So like I said, questioning maybe what the plan is. Obviously, it's not there for me to fully understand. It's not there for any of us to fully understand. But that was really the only thing that I had in that regard.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that. I think it affects everybody very differently. I've talked to other parents who had the same perspective and experience as you, Andy, and that kind of mirrored my own personal experience as well. It leaves you broken,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, you wonder why. But I never found myself getting angry with God. And it never shook my faith in Him. Knowing that we live in a fallen world, and as you said, bad things happen to good and bad people.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is spared that. Let's talk about something else that I think young parents of any age who lose a child really struggle with, and that's when it happens the first weeks and maybe even a couple of months. People are, particularly I think in the South and in the Christian community, we're very attentive to those folks who are suffering such a loss like that. So people are good about bringing food over. They're good about sending cards, and sometimes, we'll get a text or a phone call. But it seems like after the funeral is over and everybody else goes back to their normal daily activities, work and school and, all that goes along with just daily life. And for us, it feels like time has stopped and nothing feels normal again. And we're at that point, the shock's beginning to wear off and the reality's really beginning to sink in. How did you guys deal with that?
So for me, it was really honestly, it was such a blur, and to process what was happening independent of our situation, I didn't really have that insight really until I went back to work. Unless that's specifically what you're referring to, is like once life for us gets back to normal. Um, but as far as like like you said, when the funeral ended and family goes back to Michigan and wherever else, once all that happened, it was still just hyper focused on what was going on with us. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
it really my focus was not on anything that was happening outside of the house. I really couldn't care less. You know, it was just at that point, it was my job to take care of what was happening inside the house and who was in the house
sure.
with me. So that was really just my. I was hyper focused on that at the time.
Right. Now, Kendall, how about for you? Because the house can get mighty quiet after something like that happens. Even though I know that Ruby didn't come home from the hospital, but you go back to a house that was expecting to have a little one there, and people aren't there as much after that for a while. What do you think?
It honestly felt like a dream that I was going to wake up from. It didn't feel real for a long time. Going back to work for me was a little more difficult because I work with children who don't have a filter. And I went into the lunchroom one day and a little boy yelled across the lunchroom at me, "Miss Reed, I heard your baby died." So thankfully, my coworkers allowed me time. They would take my kids if I needed to have a moment in my classroom by myself.
Yeah, yeah. How long after Ruby died did you go back to work?
I had the 8 weeks maternity leave
Okay.
since I
Yeah.
had a C-section.
Well, I'm glad you had at least that much time. I'm sure it didn't feel like it near enough.
No.
Yeah. So I know this may get a little bit personal, but I do think that there is a cultural misunderstanding of how the grief from losing a child to either miscarriage or stillbirth or a death that occurs almost immediately after birth, that somehow that's different from losing a child who's older. We know that's not the case. So, how did you guys deal with those challenges? Because, like you were referring to there, Kendall, with something that one of the children said, because of a lack of filter. Sometimes that lack of filter also applies to adults.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people, because they are so, I think, uncomfortable around us, and they're uncomfortable around the whole concept of losing a child, they want to help, but sometimes they might say something in trying to help that actually makes things worse. Did you guys deal with much of that? And if you did, how did you?
I didn't experience a whole lot of no one downplayed the loss, I think because of how much I shared online. I didn't like God needed another angel.
Yeah.
I didn't no, I did. I needed my angel.
Yes. Yes. How
So
about you,
also,
Andy?
yeah. So again, I didn't have much of the down. The only thing is, the only type of downplaying or the closest thing to it that I would get would be, we just brought a living child into the world. She passed away 2 days later, and then people would come try to relate with me and say, "Oh, well, we had a couple miscarriages, this and that." And again, everybody grieves differently. Everything's specific to the individual, but it's like, okay, well, I just had a funeral for my daughter. That's really unfortunate that you guys went through that, but the thing, and then like I said, not really downplaying. If anything, it was kind of the opposite. So I would say I have a really good core group of friends and family. So I'm very, very thankful for that. In fact, for my daughter's funeral specifically, a lot of the squadron all showed up in their dress blues to show
Oh,
support. So
man.
it was really cool. It was a really cool experience in that regard, in that context. So like I said, we had a good support structure. If anything, I would say it's on the opposite end. So what would happen to me is when I go to work, when I first went back to work, everybody gave me that face. And what I mean by that is that, like, I feel so bad for you. I don't know what to say, this and that. But really, I just wanted to be treated like everybody else. I didn't want, you know what I mean? Like,
Of
I just
course.
wanted to go to work and I just wanted to do my job. And I just wanted to go home. I don't want
Yeah.
a pity party. And granted, I understand what just happened. But at the same time, there was that. And the one thing that I would say, too, that I did benefit from, and I think we all benefit from, is that if something like this happens to somebody, active listening is your best friend. You don't try to, unless you can truly relate in some real tangible way, just active listening is the best course of action. Just listen to what somebody has to say. Hey, I'm here for you. Let me know. Because trying to relate to this kind of stuff is just, unless you've lived it, you can't, and then what'll often happen is you try to relate and then you end up saying something silly or something offensive because you're trying to, and it's just, there's not a comparison to that. Just like, I've known people that, they lost their son or daughter and they were 21 or they were around 7 years old. Well, we have a baseline. Like I can understand because, I had to pick out stuff for my children's funerals. But also I didn't have 10, 20 years with, my son or daughter there. So it's all different. But at the same time, active listening is definitely the best way if you're trying to communicate with somebody who's experienced that loss or really any kind of loss, is just listen to what they have to say and kind of go from there, because that's really the most helpful I found.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Andy. I appreciate you sharing that because I think that's something that's really badly misunderstood. You don't have to show up with words or advice or anything like that. We're not projects that need to be fixed. We're just people who have been through something so traumatic that, what I think one of the things that maybe you were implying in what you shared is that grieving parents crave normalcy. We feel abnormal and we feel like we stand out like a sore thumb wherever we go. So anything that makes us feel normal for a few minutes, I think we crave those things and gravitate towards them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that.
How about you, Kendall?
Definitely, 100%. Andy talked about people giving him the face, and yes, I hate the face. I'm so sorry that happened to you face.
Yeah, that can be hard. And, I don't know about you guys, but, when you talked about trying to navigate through this with the advantage of having a relationship with the Lord, I think that with that also comes with the understanding of the importance of having other people in our lives, like you were referring to, Andy. The kind that you could call at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning if you needed to, and they would be there. It calls to mind the importance of having those people in your life before something like that happens, so that you can have them to lean on. Not only that, for encouragement to help carry some of the load, but also sometimes we have to borrow from their faith because ours takes such a hit sometimes, early on.
Yeah, and like I said, for me, I can't speak for Kendall on this one, but I didn't necessarily need to borrow any faith. That kind of just stuck with me. I was actually semi unrelated. This would be a totally different podcast if you ever want to go down this route. But I was actually an atheist for a very long time.
Really?
I was an atheist probably up until about 25 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
And just enough wild stuff happened. You can't just tell me that God's real and me, I'm just going to accept that. But okay, fine. So I had a very different journey because that was never something that was, my mom obviously wanted me to believe. It's not that, my parents didn't want me to believe or anything, but it was very, I needed concrete. I needed something very objective for me to say, hey, this is what it is. If you just tell me this is what it is, that's not enough for me. So there's a few different ways that I got there. One of them is getting into apologetics and stuff, because it's not just, okay, well, I've read the Bible, it's true, I'm good to go. Well, why is it true? Things like that. So then learning about textual criticism and all kinds of different things. Like I said, I can go on for hours about that. But for me, the way I came to faith was in such a strong, objective way that, again, that's why I view the fact that we lost children semi-independent. My belief in God is not grounded in the fact that I only bring home living children.
Right.
that's just not what it is. So for
Right.
me personally, it was a little bit different because of the way I came to God in the first place. It's not something that I always had. It's something that I had to learn. In some ways, I had to learn the hard way, but had to be very objective. And like I said, I would feel comfortable dying on that hill because I know in my heart of heart that's what's real. Because that's like I said, it that's what it took for me to get there. And now that I'm there, I may be upset about things that happen. I may not understand things that happen, but that does not disprove the existence of God or anything of that nature. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, I appreciate your transparency, Andy. Not everybody would. I think that your story that you just shared speaks of the incredible love that God has for us. That even when you didn't believe in Him, He believed in
Hmm.
you,
Right.
and He still came after you. So we can be very thankful that we have a God who loves us like that.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, let's talk about one other thing. You guys are both involved with an incredible organization called Ashley's Embrace. And we recently had the president and co founder of that organization as a guest, Aaron Maroon. So, guys, I know that you guys got involved after losing Jack. Let's talk about what it is how you guys are involved. For people that maybe didn't hear Aaron's episode, talk a little bit about what it is that Ashley's Embrace does.
Ashley's Embrace is a nonprofit that raises money to place CuddleCots in hospitals. And a CuddleCot gives the parent of a stillborn or recently departed child more time with that child. It slows down the decomposition process so that the baby's features don't change. And your family has time to meet the baby and you have time to do things with the baby. We didn't get very much time with Ruby or Jack. With Ruby, we had about 30 minutes in a quote unquote family room in Augusta. And because it was our second go round, I knew better and we had a few hours. But those are the only memories we were able to make with our kids. So the CuddleCot would have been great.
How are you guys involved with that?
I started out just fundraising, and we did fundraisers through Ashley's Embrace, and I just started sharing about the CuddleCots so often that Ashley's Embrace invited me to be a board member. So I'm now on the board of the Ashley's Embrace organization.
That is great. I'm sure that your input helps tremendously.
I try.
I will include a link again to Ashley's Embrace in your episode description, guys. Yeah, and Andy, you were getting ready to say something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to be completely clear and transparent, is that the one thing I've really tried to do as far as Ashley's Embrace and the CuddleCots go is to just try to enable Kendall. She's done the majority of the legwork, but anything I can do to assist in that or to support her in that's what I try to do. So, for example, she might do a fundraising. We'll go back and forth. She'll say, "Oh, okay, I want to do this shirt," and then I'll give design inputs, this or that, and I'll make sure to help push that information out to as many people as I can. But really, she's the one that initiates it and really starts it, spearheads the setup. I don't want, it's not necessarily equal credit. You know what I mean? She's the one that does the heavy lifting. I just make sure she's got everything that she needs to do those kind of things and to fully support that going forward. So
support and logistics, right?
Absolutely.
Good man. Kendall and Andy, is there anything that maybe we haven't talked about today from your own personal experiences that you would like to say to a grieving mom or a grieving dad who's listening to us today and just trying to figure out how in the world they're going to live through this, how they're going to navigate it, and even if they want to?
It's definitely a one day at a time situation. When we first lost Ruby, I was the same way. I didn't know how in the world I was going to keep going. And it really is just taking it one day at a time.
That's good advice.
I would agree too that it's, you take everything one day at a time. It gets better, but it doesn't get better. Things over time, it'll calm down, it'll normalize, it'll start to stabilize. You always have it with you to some degree. It's not like when you get a paper cut and you put a Band-Aid on it and then it heals and it's done and it's gone. Obviously, it's not like that. But at the same time, it does get a little easier over time. It never gets easy, but it does get easier over time. One day at a time. Trust the process and take care of yourself in the process. You don't lose yourself. You already lost a child. Don't lose yourself too. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's really the best advice I can give.
Yeah, that's good advice from both of you guys. Well, Kendall and Andy, it has truly been an honor to have both of you guys on our podcast today. I appreciate your honesty and transparency and just giving us a glimpse into the grief journey that parents go through after losing a child, and in your case, losing two.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, it is absolutely my privilege.
Gail says thank you for having her too.
Abigail, we are so glad that you could join us today. You're going to be the star of the show without a doubt. Well, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to offer your thoughts on today's episode, simply click the link under the episode summary. And if you're interested in sharing your story on a future episode, email us using the provided link. Join us again in 2 weeks to hear another story of how God meets us in our pain, creates something beautiful from the broken pieces, and restores meaning, purpose, and hope.